Okay, my name is Scott Simon. Here I am in Quebec on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa in the School of Sociological and Anthropological Studies. I've already done 20 years of Taiwan research. 我在台湾做人类学田野调查，我已经15年做台湾原住民的研究。我是跟泰鲁克族跟赛德克族做研究。So 这个也包括2年在部落。I'm focusing on hunting culture, hunting rights, indigenous relations with the state, and indigenous ideas of ecology. I would like to talk today about hunting in Taiwan and legislation. I am doing this in the context of the Basic Law on Indigenous Peoples, 原住民族基本法, which says that indigenous people have the right to hunt for cultural and subsistence purposes. The question is how to implement that in a proper way. I also am thinking about the conservation on biological diversity, which says that indigenous knowledge should be incorporated into conservation of animals. I think that this is something that's very important because the people who understand the animals, and Taiwan has some very precious mammals, are the hunters, the people who spend time in the forest. So it's important to get the hunters on the side of biological conservation. After all, it's in their interest because hunters want to protect animals so that future generations can also hunt. I'm going to make 3 points that I think are important for the legislation of hunting in Taiwan. And first of all, this is my trapping license in Quebec. I think it's important to recognize that hunting is a right, but that it has to be managed in a way that permits the survival of species. So the first point I want to make is that hunters are able to manage their own hunting territories and practices. Now what I've observed in Taiwan, Saidika and Tailuka villages is that they have their own ways of regulating their hunting. I think that these ways have been endangered by centuries of colonialism, especially the last 100 years, especially because they were moved away from the mountains and because hunting has been criminalized for the last few decades. Nonetheless, I think it's clear that they are aware of which territory belongs to which clan, and they are capable of excluding outsiders from their territories. The trappers also are very conscious of their own trap lines, which they create through their labor through the forest, and they're able to prevent others from walking on those trap lines. Of course, where it's illegal to trap, they don't put up signs to keep people out, which would be a good idea in order to prevent injuries of hikers or dogs, etc., that are with the hikers. If hunting is legalized in a way that permits hunting by individuals, then they will be able to formalize these institutions, perhaps by setting up co-management regimes, by making hunting committees. I think it's important that they would determine rules for licensing so that they can control who uses the territory and also prevent people from continuing to hunt or trap if they poach or do things illegally. They can also make their own rules for hunting seasons, for places where hunting is permitted, places where it's not permitted so that animals can recover and live, catch limits, etc. I think this is important as well because then the hunters can collaborate with wildlife biologists to better understand the number of animals that live in Taiwan, which is important for sustainable management and scientific research. I think that a way of encouraging them to join this program of co-management would be to create some kind of an income security program, such as the Cree have in the James Bay area of northern Quebec. They have a guaranteed income even when they're not hunting, and in exchange for that, they're expected to take care of their territory. I think that Taiwan can explore the income security program of the James Bay Cree. Much information is available about that, and it does deserve to be studied. So that's the first point I'd like to make, is that hunters can manage their own hunting regimes, particularly in maybe even some kind of a co-management. The second point that I wanted to make is I'm quite concerned about the guns that are used. There are hunting rifles that are legal in Taiwan. It's required that they're homemade. I think that that's quite dangerous because some people have been injured or even killed by guns backfiring and so forth. They're very difficult to use and they're dangerous for the hunters. I think that noting that the type of gun used has very little influence on the number of animals caught. That has more to do with the skill of the hunter and just the luck of finding animals. I think that with that in consideration, it would be important for Taiwan to legalize modern hunting rifles so that they can import the rifles perhaps from abroad as well as modern ammunition. I think there's concern about rifles escaping onto the black market and so forth, and so it's important to have a licensing regime and a way of registering rifles with local governments. This is something that Canada has done quite well. The third point I would like to make is about trapping. I think that trapping is entirely illegal in Taiwan. It's very common. In fact, most of the people in Taiwan who are actually trapping. Most of the older men put out traps rather than going into the mountain with hunting rifles or bows and arrows or dogs and so forth. The traps used in Taiwan tend to be very old traps with a steel draw trap clamps down on the animal's leg. The animals are trapped in there. They often try to get away, maybe by biting off their leg. They often starve to death. They have very painful deaths. I'm quite concerned about that. I think that by legalizing trapping, it would be possible to have better traps. Here in Canada, they, because of an agreement, especially with the European Union, which permits the export of furs only if they have cruelty-free traps, the traps are much better in terms of the protection of the animals. These cruelty-free traps kill the animals rather within seconds, and so there's much less suffering. The good traps as well make it easier to select the species that are caught. So for example, if it's a trap that catches on their leg, if it's a smaller animal, then it can just, even if it hits it, it might just keep going. So anyway, a good trapper with the right traps can target the species desired. I think that's important for dealing with questions of endangered species. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to make about legislation of hunting. I think it's important, first of all, to recognize hunters can manage their own hunting regimes. This may need some facilitation, but it certainly means decriminalization and legalization of hunting. This can be done in a way that regulates hunting and helps to manage wildlife resources in a sustainable way. And then secondly, I think it's important to make guns safer and more modern and legalize trapping. Indigenous peoples have hunted for thousands of years in Taiwan. They are part of the environment, they're part of the balance that's been established for thousands of years. The fact that the animals still exist, in spite of changes to their habitat, proves that hunting practices have been sustainable. So the basic law says that it's a right to hunt, and I think that it's necessary to create the right laws to implement that right. For both protecting indigenous rights and for protecting animals, it's important to have collaboration between hunters and biologists. In order to do so, hunting must be legalized but managed in a sustainable way. I think this can be done through new forms of management, including licensing and perhaps an income security program that will entice hunters to join these new regimes in exchange for income security. And it's a way in which they'll be encouraged to protect their territory and the animals that live there. So that's what I think. Thank you.